You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good and truth in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a transformational catalyst and life coach to maverick change agents in business, leadership, and life. On this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including Earthkeeper, Wayfinder, Truth Teller, coach, lawyer, business, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, soul mastery, and deeper impact so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you love it, please share and spread the word. We're on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. See the show notes on catalysttalks.com for links, and enjoy this episode. My guest today on Catalyst Talks podcast is John Roulac. I'm in awe, inspired, and excited to dive in and share this conversation with you all today, plus the synchronicity that blew me away. John has been called the archetype of leadership for the new era of business. He's been called a savvy executive, CPG executive, a truly passionate environmentalist and activist. And his writing is a journey of dot connecting evidenced truth. He's the founder of Nutiva, where he has sourced and formulated $1 billion in retail sales of organic superfoods. I'm sure you've seen, if not used Nutiva on health food store shelves. I have several products in my shelves and I've used them for years. John's a serial entrepreneur, investor, writer, philanthropist, and executive producer of the Netflix blockbuster regenerative agriculture film, Kiss the Ground, narrated by Woody Harrelson. Here's the kicker. So John has found 6 nonprofit organizations, including Great Plains Regeneration, Agroforestry Regeneration Communities, that operates now in Eastern Africa and Guatemala, and Forests Forever, which is where I worked before becoming a tree sitter in 1996. And I just connected that dot after John said yes to being on the podcast. He's also the author of Backyard Composting, Your Complete Guide to Recycling Yard Clippings. And now it's time. Let's drop in with John. John, thanks so much for being here. You are the ultimate dot connector. This is a perceptual capability or skill that comes with a greater awakening of consciousness. Gratefully, we're seeing that on the planet more, yet there's still a lot of work to do. And I'm excited to dive in, learn about you, your work, your spiritual journey, and then we'll talk about what many would call conspiracy theories, what we would call the truth. How are you today? What are you currently working on? What's top of mind for you? Let's start there and go backwards.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate being on your show today. So what's top of mind? This past year, I've really been focusing a lot on how to help the 500 million smallholder farmers in the global South, which is kind of a forgotten class of people. Usually when you think about food production, a lot of times people who are not involved in agriculture, they just think it's like, some large farm, whatever. But the vast majority of farmers are small farmers, and they grow, the majority of the food in the world. So I founded a group called Agroforestry Regeneration Communities, which you mentioned earlier. And we work with existing programs. So we don't start up programs. We work with existing programs, and our most active programs are right now in Guatemala and East Africa, specifically Malawi is where we've been doing a lot of work. And we help the farmers show that they can go from growing, a lot of times it's ironically, both those countries, even though one's in Guatemala, another continent, another one's in Africa, the farmers mostly grow maize. They use chemical fertilizers, made in the U.S. or Europe, what have you. And then they have poor nutrition, and we help them grow a tree called glittersiri and a bunch of other types of trees, but that also grows in both those countries. And they both have about 18 or 19 million people. And some of the poorest people in the world, but at the same time they have a really opportunity to change their diet and change their income. So we help them plant a variety of different trees with the programs we work there, so they get better nutrition. They deal with droughts better, and we do this through trainings and also providing the trees through setting up nurseries. So we planted 5,000 food forests in the last year and a half or two. So it's not a huge amount, but it's a good start. And our goal, and we planted over almost 2 million trees, and our goal is to plant 100,000 food forests by 2027. But we literally need hundreds of millions. But if we could do 100,000, hopefully we'll inspire our program and other programs for more people to get involved.
So in the trajectory that you've been on, what was the moment, that catalytic moment where this creation came into being? What were you doing before? What led to this?
Yeah, well, I founded Nutiva in 1999 with like 500 hemp bars that I sold out of the trunk of my car, and that ended up helping to kind of transform the hemp food industry, which was very tiny back then. And today it's more common. You can buy it at Costco or most supermarkets. And then I ended up I stepped down 4 years ago at Nutiva as CEO. So I ran it for like 17 years. But in the process, I put aside some of my stock into a what they call like a donor advised fund. So it's a way to, like, you can donate some shares, assets, you get tax breaks, and then it's like a philanthropy way to give. And so some of the projects that I've been supporting the last few years just happened to be around agroforestry that I was most excited about, and they were just doing really good work. And I thought, well, I could continue to support a few groups, or I could help build a kind of a container to tell the world and storytell around it, and take these projects that I really like and have them be part of it. So really, they're the ones that are doing the work. I'm just the guy with the cell phone and the computer and some street cred to help them get resources and money and things. So that's kind of how it came about. And I helped co-found it with a friend of mine who's in permaculture, Hannah Eckberg. So but yeah, that's a little how that came about.
Where did the Great Plains, your work with the Great Plains?
Oh, yeah. And that's a program. It's interesting that out of the things not going as well for that came agroforestry regeneration communities. So when the Kiss the Ground film, the Netflix blockbuster that I came up with the idea to do that film about 8 years ago. My thoughts was, so this film was coming out, and I knew regenerative agriculture was going to be kind of, it's like 15 minutes of fame or time in the sun. So I said, what can I focus on? So I thought, well, how about, because I'm kind of semi-retired and I kind of choose to do what I want to do. So I thought, well, let's go right in the middle of the country, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and I had some people there that I knew, and see if we can really focus on regeneration there. And we went down that path and spent a lot of time there, and it was so interesting. A lot of the people there, they had this whole projection of who I was because I was in California, because I was an environmentalist. It's so it's so interesting how, and the same way on the people on the coast, they have this perception of what people are like. It's very dysfunctional. Both groups, both regions have this whole projection without even realizing that what they may be thinking,
Is that getting in the way of progress?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But what I found was that it's much harder to change farmers. It's much harder to change corporations in the United States. And I wanted to, I kind of feel like I'm water sometimes. Like if I feel like if I flow a certain way and there's obstacles, then I'll try it again. And then at a certain point, then I'll just go another way. So I was like, why can't we just pick like one region in the middle of the country and focus on regen ag. And a few people thought that was a good idea, but not enough. And then we wanted to do like a farm to flour, like baking flour. And we had a lot of the pieces together, but we couldn't get the people to agree to work with each other in a way that was going to make happen. So I stepped aside from that, and I said, if you go to farmers in Guatemala, there's no extension agent saying you can't do tree crops.
Yeah.
There's no banker saying they're basically on the edge. They're one harvest away from starvation.
Mm.
So when we show working examples, they want to do it, but that's not the case in the United States. We're so locked in. It's such a industrial behemoth system that really our challenge is we've been the leader of the pack for so long and dominant as a culture and a society on the global scale that much of our time and effort is focused really by people who are holding on to the way things were.
Yeah.
Versus what they could be, and also people just don't like change. But so that's kind of how agroforestry regeneration communities, and we find the people we work with, they say, hey, we're going to do a workshop on 5 days on permaculture and show you how you can create abundance of food. And people show up and work and they go, this is amazing. I never, I mean, 70% of all the farmers in both those countries, they just grow corn. That's it. They don't grow bananas. They don't grow avocados. They don't grow vegetables.
These are the foods that are native to those places.
Yeah. And so, but when they find out, they're pretty excited. So, the other thing that we're doing there is we want to educate people. So we've helped support agroforestry centers. So like in Antigua, Guatemala, with contour lines, which is the program that we work with down there. So there's a place you can come in and they have a little processing. So they process like making cassava. They take the cassava, which is a common crop, and turn it into and make jackfruit pizzas, gluten-free pizzas, and making different salsas and different products, like a little cafe.
I want to jump in here for a second because, like, imagine you're talking to people that don't know what regenerative ag is, regen ag, right?
Right. Yeah.
So like, what is regenerative ag?
What is regenerative ag? Yeah, we'll jump into that. So what we have today is degenerative. What do you think the greatest export crop the United States has in the United States? Topsoil. Yeah, right out the rivers. So we're losing like billions and billions of tons a year. So we have a degenerative system that we're liquidating nature and our natural assets to produce food and fiber in a way that has wiped out 75% of all winged insects. We've lost 60% of our topsoil, and that's a degenerative system. Now, 30 years ago, some smart people said, well, we could do sustainable agriculture. So instead of driving the car, instead of like trying to restore, it basically just says, well, we'll just take the current dysfunctional system and we won't make it any worse. But if you've already lost 60% of your topsoil and 75% of all your insects and et cetera, and 90% of all the minerals in the soil, basically our food is devoid of nutrition. I mean, in 1938, the Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, said the United States faces a huge crisis, that we've destroyed our soils for minerals. That was 1938. So regenerative agriculture essentially regenerates, it restores the soils. So by working with plants and animals and people are part of the solution. But yet, if you go to the World Economic Forum and you talk to some of these experts, they're all saying people are useless. We don't need people anymore. people, farmers and ranchers and homeowners, people are, one of the key things is keeping the ground covered, keeping the soil covered, by growing various crops. Like if you drive through the middle of the country, or in many places, whether it's in California or Kansas, in the wintertime, the soil is bare and the wind is just blowing away. And regenerative farmers, they grow something there in the wintertime. And the ones who are even smarter, and they kind of and understand this, they'll bring in cattle, and they'll have cattle and sheep, and they'll grow a crop, they'll eat it, they'll fertilize it, and then they'll go on somewhere else. And then when they grow their next crop, they don't need to buy any fertilizer because they use the manure of the animals there. But the challenge with all this is it's very simple and it makes sense, but just because it makes sense doesn't mean it happens. I like to say, if you go to Washington, D.C., when you talk about logic and reason, they laugh. They just smile and laugh at you. Whether it's Joe Biden or Obama or Trump or Nancy Pelosi, they literally just laugh at you. That's not the way things work here. It's about money and power. And so we just have a dysfunctional system, and the solutions have been around for a long time, but they are not adopted because money and power doesn't want logic and reason. Now, not to be completely, negative but things are falling apart on a system level quickly. But there are also good signs. There are some solutions, and even some of the largest corporations in the world today realize that if they destroy all their soils for growing food, that's not going to be very good for their business. So some people are waking up. There's a movement called that Kiss the Ground, the NGO, the nonprofit I'm part of. They have a project called Regenerate America. So we're taking some of the best regenerative farmers and spending 2 hours with members of Congress, and they can't believe what they see in 2 hours. And then they'll exchange phone numbers and they'll stay in connection. So it's really about education. But what we're talking about, this is not rocket science. We've known about this, and that's what the film Kiss the Ground really talks about. So, I'm not always the easiest to be around because I kind of see through the bullshit. And I've been doing this since they dumped nuclear waste at my house, or 9 miles from my house, unidentified truck driver, like 40 plus years ago. So I'm of the view that the system cannot be changed. The system is going to fall apart, and the system is, we're going to need, it's kind of like if someone is just a really bad driver and they don't want to change, at some point they're going to crash the car.
Yeah.
You can hope that they don't crash the car, but
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that there has been, in the last 10 years, 5 years, a huge shift in the narrative. And so, back in the day, it wasn't sustainability, it was environment, right? It was the environment, it was rivers, trees, forests, and then sustainability and the SDGs. And so we have this kind of branding and then these buzzwords, and regeneration is also, that's the new word for now. And so what you just put a whole lot on the table, though. Your experience, and I could say this because knowing I worked for Forest Forever, like when I was 20, and I didn't even realize that you were the founder of that organization. But so you're this person who's been at this for a long time, and like you see, we can look at it now and look at the system and sit down and do a systems mapping exercise and say, here are the different people and players and stakeholders and components in a system, and really do some kind of analysis and data study. You do that, and you've also been like boots on the ground, seeing, like veil off for this many years and watching this. So you're not just new to this, conversation saying the system's going to crash, it's climate, and look at the IPCC report. So why I'm putting that all there is so because people listening really understand the breadth that you're coming with. Like, give us one example. I saw in one of your articles about like when you were CEO of Nutiva, like this is really just about, so you're not just sitting in your cabin, like, talking about your theories, like you're out there in the field
Right.
seeing it. So an example of when you were at Nutiva, I was reading in one of your articles, the FDA sort of like their compliance shenanigans around non-GMO and labeling, these perceptions that the public has around what is law and what is, what are the rules.
About 2002, they started sending letters to different food brands and said they couldn't use the word non-GMO on their labels. And it was just an opinion by some officer. There was no rule or regulation. There was no process to say that was, why is that illegal? Why isn't that in violation? They couldn't cite anything. It was just their opinion. And they sent it off to everybody. And basically people were fearful. Most companies the large companies all say, oh, well, we don't want to say non-GMO, so they removed from their labels. And I was like, why? I mean, I didn't contact them, but it's like they contacted me. Well, show me in the regulation. Show me where that says that. They don't have anything there. So we just kept selling, and they didn't bother us. But a few years before, I had a lot of interactions with government agencies. A few years before, the DEA said that our hemp bars that we were selling in 2001 were in the same category as heroin, Schedule 1.
How? Because
they had minuscule amounts of THC, like less than a grain of sand in a rail car. And so I was facing either 10 to 15 years in jail, or bankruptcy, or fight. I chose the fight, and we won that lawsuit. So now that was the base for keeping hemp foods legal. And another case was I had stepped down as CEO at Nutiva, and I was started up a hemp CBD company, and the state of California sent like 4 or 5 people and backup wearing like billy clubs and things into our offices and demanded to see everything. They spent 4 or 5 hours. They wrote it. They said it was illegal for us to sell hemp oil because we didn't say hemp seed oil. So there was no basis for anything. They spent all this time. They swore they thought that they thought my CBD was my warehouse there, but I had put it in Colorado. I couldn't as a California citizen, I couldn't even start up a hemp CBD company, even though I served on the board of Governor Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown, advising the state of California. I've had some interesting things there with that. But regeneration though has a lot of potential. And it's just really the way I kind of look is the systems are not working. So the systems people are like, this whole disruption from COVID and then the Ukraine-Russia war is really like, these are like tremors to a system. And so it's important for people to understand, where they get their food, where their water's coming from. With the extreme weather conditions going on, you're going to see intense storms. And one of the things I just want to share is one of the disappointments that I've seen in the environmental movement and this whole climate thing is that we've put everything into a bucket called climate. So essentially, in the last 10 years, it's everything that they say, oh, that's climate. Oh, if there's really bad weather, that's climate. Rivers rushing, washing away, that's climate. This going on, oh, that's climate.
Yeah.
And what we don't realize is the leading, carbon, we're so fixated on carbon. Carbon is an important molecule, but water vapor is much more common in the atmosphere and is much more impactful really on our weather. But no one talks about that virtually. And there's something called the small water cycle. I see this, I remember I recently commented on LinkedIn. We've spent, thousands of years of really war on nature.
Yeah.
We've stripping all the soil away, denuding doing plowing, industrial farming, grazing animals in a degenerative way versus a regenerative way. And I want to circle back on one of the ways. So a friend of mine that just recently visited me from the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico, and how he's restoring his desert grazing land. But cutting down the trees, treating rivers and creeks like sewers. I mean, it's really, we've disconnected from nature, destroyed so much of nature. And to think that the reason why places are drying up and all this is all because we're burning petroleum.
Yeah.
It's oversimplified. And yeah, we need to burn less petroleum. But the reality is, for 30 years, the environmental groups and the climate movement is saying, let's do wind and solar and EVs, end of subject. That's going to solve it. And every year it just keeps going up. All this green energy, all it does, it's a supplemental. We just keep burning as much petroleum, and people are flying around on planes and doing all these things. But what people can change a lot more than just necessarily on our energy policy is how we grow our food. Like your lawn, do you spray pesticides in your lawn? Are you going and getting Miracle Grow made of synthetic fertilizers that are from fracked natural gas with massive amount of methane and releasing all sorts of chemicals? Or do you do it in more of working with nature on a regenerative basis? So that's really, really important on how we take care of. But a lot of my friends tell me those, they said, John, you have to understand, and this is a reality, is it's challenging to live in 2022.
Yeah.
Like how much rent is, how much fuel costs are, the issues with parents with kids. And so people don't have as much time to focus on these bigger issues that you and I are, talking about right now.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the issues, is how to deal with that. I want to go back to go ahead.
Yeah, I want to pin that for a second and hold that thought, because everything you just said, I mean, I've seen you write about this and talk about this. It's why, like how we got here is like this system that we're talking about of, toxic food, disease, glyphosate and poisoning our yards, poisoning the water. And then there's pandemics, and then there's big pharma. So where all of these big industries, including, energy, including pharma, including food, how do they all, there's this game playing. Is there some, do you think there's some mastermind in a room somewhere saying, you do that, we'll do that, and then we'll come with this, and like, how do you see it?
I mean, the fact that we now 80% of Americans have glyphosate, which was invented, by Monsanto, which was a common herbicide. That it's in 80% of our urine. It's in our mother's milk. It's in our blood. It's in the rainwater. And how have we been able to create a food system that basically poisons people? And in America, we produce foods that when they export to other countries, it's not even allowed. So how is that? That's through lobbyists. So the what I call the kind of the old school term is the military industrial complex. It's very powerful, and it just makes money. I mean, if you talk, and the interesting thing is, I could answer that question and I could say it in words that liberal and progressives would go right on, and conservatives would go, oh, that's not true. And I could also respond to it in ways that conservatives would go right on, and then liberals say, oh, that's not true.
And
So
how we got there, yeah.
yeah, basically these are two wings of the same bird, of the incumbency. As I like to say, whether it's Joe Biden or Barack Obama or George Bush or Bill Clinton, Monsanto chooses the Secretary of Ag, JP Morgan chooses the Secretary of Treasury, and Merck and Pfizer chooses the FDA and Department of Health, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And people want to argue one way or the other, but the formation of the Federal Reserve, though, was a seminal moment for our country's history. And back then, you could buy a very nice house in most cities in the country for $100. And we have created financial systems and processes to create massive inflation. I mean, mortgages used to be like 3 years in the
Yeah.
30s. And the idea that you could get a 30-year mortgage for 2.75% interest with very little down, when inflation is really 5 to 10%. Now, mortgage rates aren't 2.5 or 3% now, but how could you, like if you would have talked to our grandparents or parents and said, how is it that inflation is 5 to 10% a year, and it's almost double what is published?
Yeah. So by pause, because you're putting a lot on the table here. So back to what you were saying about, who chooses the Secretary of Ag, and the revolving door about, executives who were, worked in the agencies, and how we got here to create this like perception of the economy that people are colluding with and buying into. Like how we got here is a function of perception, right? We're going along with something.
Right, yeah. The challenge is, if you really look at how things operate, it's not very fun or pretty. So people are invested in that it's not that way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think I could be a college professor if and teach an agriculture class and talk about what I just said? No. Could I be a member of a social club of other wealthy entrepreneurs that made money in various industries? Would they want to hang around with me and talk about those issues?
But
No.
why do you think they don't? Why though? Why?
Because it's part of the club. Like, if you go along with a system, you see, people realize it's kind of a social thing. If you go along with a system, you profit from the system. You benefit from the system. Then you don't criticize it. You don't say the king has no clothes. So people are just walking around all over America, especially the wealthier people, knowing it's complete bullshit. Knowing it's based on fraud, knowing it's based on corruption, but they won't say anything because to do that would mean that they're no longer, that they're putting at risk their family and their friends. And I just happen to be someone, I'm not really cancelable. I'm in my 60s. I'm semi-retired, and also, I like to speak truth to power, but also the great thing about America is I can say this conversation and I'm likely not to be, killed or put in jail. Whereas if I was in Russia, I probably would. If I was out in China, I definitely would. So, there's a reason why my grandfather came from Wales at age 8. And with no money and came here and was able to build an amazing life, and and he loved his country, and I love America too. So I'm not, and I've been given a lot of opportunity, but it's a, we're kind of getting, this is a little kind of esoteric here. We're talking about and philosophy of things.
Yeah, well, that's what we do sort of on this podcast, because ultimately, like, you're doing amazing things. We can look at all your projects and get into the fine details of literally what, like, watch kiss the ground, everybody. But the question, because you are a deep thinker and dot connector, and even, there's a lot of people connecting dots right now, but the extent that you are and you're willing to really speak this truth, there's also a lot of like, how are some people who are the environmental activists, the folks that, were rolling up their sleeves in the past? Like, I used to thought I was liberal for a while, but now I'm like, well, I don't even know, I'm nothing. But the question is really, like, there's this kind of smoke and mirrors going on, I see, in a lot of the do good conversation. Like,
definitely.
all people there are plenty of people who are, like, rolling up their sleeves and rolling up their checkbooks for regen ag, right? And yet not connecting all the dots, say, on the FDA, on, what's going on behind the veil.
Well, I'll give you an example. When I decided to shift my focus, back around 2013 or 14, I'd been doing a lot of campaigns around GMOs, besides running Nutiva, in my spare time. We did campaigns. We put over 100,000 comments on Cheerios, General Mills, Facebook wall, telling them to remove GMOs from the Cheerios, and we were able to, in 14 months we forced them to do that, and we got Hershey's to remove GMOs, and we did a bunch of companies as a project called GMO Inside. And then I decided, well, instead of, I realized that there was a limited window, and then Facebook started changing the algorithms, so I wasn't able to work anymore so well. We were able to just, like, there was a period of time where we could just get, lots of views and lots of education. So then I decided to switch to Regen Ag as a way, like, okay, instead of saying Roundup, glyphosate's bad, pesticides are bad, this is, if you focus on soil health, we can get the farmers focused on soil health, then they don't need those other chemicals as much. And that's what Regen Ag, and that's what holds the promise. Though it's not so easy to take somebody who's got a 5,000 acre, GMO corn and soy field to go regen, 100% day one. It's a process, I'm more practical than I was. So like if we can take a farmer that's and cut their chemical fertilizer and their herbicides by 50% in 3 years, I say right on. And that's what we need. Though some of my friends were like, that's horrible, John, you're a sellout. Like, if they're not organic, fuck them. It's like, and that's what, there's a lot of environmentalists are that way. They actually hate people. But the reality is yeah, go tell that to the people who are drinking, who are trying to swim in the lakes and drinking the groundwater in Iowa. If we can cut it back by 50% in 3 years, we've made some good progress. And maybe from there we can get them, and some of those we can put on a pathway. Give you an example that I kept noticing, where are all my environmentalist friends? From the Sierra Club, from 350.org. They were all, they'd be presenting at Pioneers, I'd be presenting at Pioneers. And then I wrote them letters, published it in EcoWatch, and interesting, the Sierra Club actually was one of the ones that actually reached out. 350 just, like, ignored it, didn't even want to talk. Greenpeace wrote some politically correct thing that was,
about Regen Ag?
Yeah, they some sort of politically correct reply. But the reality is, what I've come to the conclusion is the major environmental organizations in the United States, they are controlled opposition. And they will talk all day about, yeah, coal's bad. Like Michael Bloomberg's given Sierra Club over $100 million. And they just don't want to talk about soil health. They don't want to talk about agriculture. They don't want to talk about some of these things. In fact, they've been attacking it. And I actually called out Sierra Club. They were promoting Impossible Burger, Monsanto GMO burgers.
Okay, let's go into that for folks listening who might not really understand where these Impossible Burgers came from and what they really are.
Yeah. So about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, Monsanto, Bayer, all the big players, they realized Americans didn't want more pesticides, they didn't want more GMOs, and they wanted a better food system. But the supply chain wasn't there to provide that. And corporate America, the brands were like, they're getting beat up. And I was one of those groups that helped beat them up and trying to get people to shift. They came up with a new term, a new campaign, that they could take their same old products, killing the soil. Remember, we've lost 75% of all winged insects, bees, butterflies, in the last 50 years. And we're losing 1% to 2% a year. You go to 2035, there's not many bees, there's not butterflies. And by the way, guess what eats a lot of those insects? Birds. So there won't be many birds. We've lost 60% of the plankton in the ocean. We're losing 1% to 2% a year. So, there's not going to be 8 or 9 billion by 2030, by 2050, which Monsanto and the World UN always talks about. We're coming to a quickening for human reality here, unless we change course. And nature we can transform and restore nature. If we just said it was like the Manhattan Project and saying we're all going to focus on whatever we do, whether we're a school teacher or a farmer or someone with 2 moms and with a mom with a couple kids, and just taking growing some veggies in their backyard and going to the farmers market, we can all play a role in it. But so they basically created this thing called plant-based. So Silicon Valley and Wall Street created plant-based. They take the same chemicals that are killing everybody and poisoning people. So this plant-based movement combined with Silicon Valley and Wall Street created these fake meats, but they needed one thing to make this go. So you saw from Bloomberg to The Economist to the World to the World Economic Forum, to the United Nations, to the University of Oxford, to UC Davis, and there's literally tens of thousands of people just working full time on this, that cows are evil. Yeah. Cows are evil. Animals we should, it's horrible. We got to get rid of the animals, and they don't even think they're supposed to be animal lovers, but they want to get rid of them, and it's basically, they've been putting out misinformation. And if you notice, they never say one thing about a pig. It's like, how is it the New York Times talks about how bad cows are for the environment? Like they've gotten billions of dollars of PR, and they never talk about a pig.
Well, I mean, I have been what people would call vegan. I don't call myself anything. I'm a nutritarian, qualitarian. And people just assume. They assume, if you're vegan, then you have that belief too. Right. And that's not the point. No. Exactly. And so what we're dealing with is strategic brand confusion. There's it's just confusion out there.
Yeah.
So
So I want to just share a little about that. So if people want to be vegan, and I have a lot of vegan friends who support the work that we're doing in regenerative ag. So the question is, if you can produce healthy soil and bring back the bees and the butterflies and the hummingbirds and the winged insects. I see some hummingbirds flying around my garden right now that I planted some flowers that they like to come to. And whether that's vegan or from meat, that's great. Those are choices, and we want to honor that. But by demonizing the cow, we've really misunderstood things. And I want to go back. So there's a friend named Alejandro Carrillo, and his dad had a 25,000 acre ranch in northern Chihuahua Desert, and 100 years ago it was tall and grass. There was seasonal creeks. There was jaguars and all sorts of beautiful wildlife. And that goes all the way up into Mexico and Arizona and West Texas. And basically we've turned it into a desert from overgrazing. So people are blaming the cow. Yeah, if you have cows and they just walk on the same ground month after month, year after year, which they do, that's not the way nature, that's the degenerative system. So what he does is he just with fencing and cows, he'll take the entire herd and he'll bring them all together in a tight spot for one day, even a half a day. And then they move and they don't come back for another year. He's been able to, now the grasses are now taller than a cow and he wants them to be taller than the horse. And they're bringing back more wildlife. And he has like 100,000 acres with his other farm ranchers.
Yeah.
And one of the other farm ranchers complained to him. They said, "You're stealing our rain because we're restoring the rain cycle. We can bring back rain. We can balance the planet. Nature. We can take the too much carbon in the ocean, which is the reason why plankton is dying. The reason why systems are collapsing because the number one system of food, the number one system of oxygen, the number one system of biodiversity is called the ocean. 70% of the planet is ocean, and the basis is plankton. And with so much carbon, if you fast forward what the carbon level is going to be on the atmosphere, no plankton even grows. So when the oceans go, that means no dolphins, no whales. When I give presentations on this, I'll sometimes have scientists come and I say, well, by 2040, I don't think there's going to be a whale or a dolphin in the ocean. They come up to me later and they say, John, you're very optimistic.
Yeah.
But the idea is, where did all that carbon that's swirling in the atmosphere for thousands of years, from when the Romans cut the forests in northern Africa to make their ships, and when our forefathers came to the United States and started plowing up the Great Plains, where did all that's all up in the atmosphere and it's gone into the ocean? Where does it belong? Back into nature, back into the soils, back into plants, back into roots. And that's what we can do. It's an easy solution. It's challenging to make it happen at a scale because people are brainwashed. People are convinced that somebody who's a red person is the enemy, and the blue person is, or the blue person is the enemy. We've just, and partly our food is so poor. So the one thing I would say is focus on your health as much as you can. One thing I recommend, make sure you do the yoga plank every day. If when everybody goes to yoga class, that keeps you strong. That's what I do. Really helps, makes a big difference. I recommend, given there's so many people are going to get cancer, that you eat mushrooms at least a couple times a week. And they have these more kind of exotic mushroom or different kind of mushrooms you don't always see in the store, like lion's mane or oyster mushrooms, and more kind of startup businesses are offering that. Don't eat for 14 hours each day, and if you can do 16, even better.
So let me ask you, I know I'm grateful I get the connect, but what made you just drop that in right there, the health information?
Because it's going to be very tough times going forward. Like, this is going to take a lot of our strength. So when the system is brittle,
strengthen yourself
and work more in your community. But there's so many, there also at the same time, there's so many people doing lots of good good work. And a lot of interesting things going on around the world.
We are the system too, right? Like everything we do, our thoughts we are part of the system. And so I love this suggestion for taking care of yourself. And
one thing I wanted to just jump in, I wanted to share. The other thing is, people need to be prepared for a very tough financial reality. Right now, there's this whole projection that the economy is really good. We're gonna have this soft landing, trying to raise interest rates in the United States. But the reality is, 40% of all publicly traded companies in America have lost money, will lose money this year. They lost money last year and they lost money 5 years ago. Those companies have been cut off from the faucet of cash flow from bonds and stocks, debt and equity. And so there's going to be a lot of layoffs coming in America in the coming year. And so people just need to be more conservative and cut their expenses and try to be, I mean, rents are going up. It's really challenging times. People really need to like think differently. You know, like some people are going, why don't we just rent a bigger house and get a few friends to come together or whatever? People need to be more creative. And the more economically sound you can be, then you can focus on taking care of the environment and the earth.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that you hold, you know, here you're a person you're focused on solutions, you're focused on big picture, and you're also focused on dismantling the old. And few people are doing that. Most people are focused on either a solution or the dismantling. And when you're focused on just the dismantling, it could be a dark place because you're fighting something ugly, and it's ugly. You have to fight with the tools of the thing you're fighting. Right. And when you're in creation mode, it creates possibility, and it's transformational. Right.
Yeah,
And so the dance between holding both, I think, are really important right now. And coming from a place of suspending, like, this is the thing, everything you're saying, the way forward, along with our physical, our physical responsibilities, is suspending these identities, these identifications we have with one side or the other, or this, or I'm vegan, or I'm that, or I'm that. It's like time to suspend all these identities that have been indoctrinated by this system.
Yeah. The other thing, kind of a philosophical point of view, I've become clear that I've let go of the concept that I know the outcome of how all this is going to flow. I have some views or opinions, obviously, and I'm also understand sometimes my what I think is going to happen doesn't always happen. But I've let go of the attachment. I mean, it definitely doesn't look good when you've lost 60% of the plankton that drives the entire ocean and you're losing 1 to 2% a year. You know, you might think, wow, what does that look like? But I'm also open to that perhaps things may change, or circumstances or things we may not even see. You know, there may be something else, some other thing that's going on this planet that we as little, you know, humans walking around with our you know, our ego and all this, we may not even understand it. And so you know, to enjoy it, you know. But you know, partly I get into a lot of this because I just feel like I've been given a lot of opportunity in my life, and I love nature, you know, and I love people, and the system is very messed up, and I don't mind taking on the system, you know, even though a lot of times I lose, but every once in a while I'll win. So, but it's not for everybody. If everyone just did a little thing, the system would change hugely. The reason why it's able to continue on in such a dysfunctional way is people believe they don't have power.
Yeah.
You know, they're you know, they're disenfranchised.
So let's take one example. Okay. I live in a lake community. I'm kind of a relatively new member of this community, and the lake, they spray, I didn't know this until after I moved in, they spray it with copper oxide. Okay. Like 3 times the summer. And I'm like, I'm not going in that. They do it because of the algae blooms. And we know why the algae blooms, right? The glyphosate, the fertilizers, the failing septic systems. And it's too expensive to do more regenerative practices like create aeration and plantings. And so their argument is it's too expensive one way, or to do it the natural way.
Yeah.
So
it's unfortunate. And there are, though, there are natural products that you can put into lakes that will help reduce some of the algae growth that aren't so expensive. I'll give you another example of a project. In North St. Louis, There's a group called the Black Power Blueprint and the Uhuru movement. And, like many cities, urban cities, those who don't have very much money, often people of color, were just abandoned.
Hmm.
And so I met them a few years ago, and they said, we want to put a basketball court. And there's no basketball. Can you imagine that? A really poor area, but it's an urban area, and there's no basketball courts. And so basketball is like my favorite sport, and I like to play, and fan of the Warriors and Steph Curry. He's a real inspiration, the Golden State Warriors. Um, uh, and so I'm helping them. They just finished up building the basketball court. And the irony is, this group, 2 weeks ago, had 50 FBI agents smashing down their doors all over in multiple houses. Didn't show them a search warrant. They've done nothing illegal, and they claim that they won't even list their names, that they're does 1, 2, and 3 on some Russian, person to steal elections in America. And here, one of the leading groups, these like black nationalists, they're nonviolent, but they are confronting the power structure, like me a bit. And they created a weekly farmers market, and they're restoring houses. They're creating a doula center for women, and really helping. And that's what I loved about them. I said, wow, I may not necessarily agree with everything that they're doing, but I really like the fact that they're not just complaining, they're doing something, and they want to build a basketball court. And now kids in the neighborhood can go play basketball, which is a great thing.
Hmm.
But that's an example of good solutions. And then the irony is that the Biden administration took it to them that they could just go and knock down their doors and smash their windows, and this is the authoritarian. What I've seen, ironically, is that I see the left is no longer the left that myself and many others used to know. We were for the environment. We're not for Monsanto. We're against war. We're against invading other countries. Democratic Party likes to invade other countries. That's a policy now. And we used to be for health, and we used to be for natural immunity, and we used to be for freedom of the speech, freedom of the press. It's like they shape shifted from Reagan and Bush to Obama and Biden in 30 years. And does that mean I like all these crazy, far out, QAnon Republicans? No. But and what happened was the power structure just said, we got a new horse to ride. We're gonna bet on this horse. We think this horse is best. And an example of that is ESG today. The Wall Street and companies all over America saying, well, we're going to do environmental sustainability, goals and guidelines. The leading ESG company in the world is Bayer, Monsanto, and Pfizer.
Yeah.
And so essentially,
But it
in my
wasn't.
view,
It wasn't all before. And in
it wasn't.
fact,
Yeah, no, I was actually in some of the meetings, the original meetings around this social responsible investing, but it's gone this progression. So essentially, what I've seen is again, another example. The power structure is using the progressive movement to hunt, as basically taking it over.
just to everything you just said and where we are, it is like, what's one thing we could do is to stop colluding with everything and to start questioning things.
It's definitely challenging. At the same time, life is miraculous and amazing, and
It
there's
is.
lots of there's lots of great things. And I remember that Wendell Berry quote about when we are despondent and when we are challenged with the system, going out and lying under in the forest under a beautiful tree in a meadow, and just experiencing all that there is of life, and experiencing nature. And yes, we have this kind of mad world that we've all helped create in 2022. We're all part of it. We're not, we're not perfect. We're not all, it's not us versus them. We're all in this. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that's important to remember. Uh, and and though I used to do it more. I need to get back to it. I also encourage people to turn your phone off. If you can for 14 or 16 hours at least once a week. I need to get back to
Yeah.
that more often.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for all of your work. I would just want to kind of bring us all back to this real miraculous thing when I reached out to me, it is miraculous. When I reached out to you, and I just, because I've seen your posts on LinkedIn and I've been reading and following your work. And then I reached out, and before we got on our first call, I Googled you and I was like, oh my God, he founded Forests Forever. And so for my listeners, some people have heard my story where I, found my love for the ancient redwood trees and started going door to door. And I raised so much money. I was so passionate. And it was because you and your colleagues founded that organization, Forests Forever. So there's a lot, as John demonstrated, that we can do just with our passion and, follow your passion, speak up, question everything. We are at a moment where it's time to question everything and go lay in a meadow. Anything else you'd add?
I second that. Yeah.
Awesome.
And people can follow me uh, on Substack. I have
We'll put your links in.
blog on there, and then I'm working on a new project to help people who are growing from a house plant to a vegetable garden to fruit trees to flowers, a new product that's going to enhance soil health and regeneration. So it's probably a year away, but I'm working hard on that right now.
That's a game changer. So I'll add all your links in. Oh, and links to your book, backyard compost. Any word on your backyard composting? And
I wrote that in 1991. Back in the day, helps spread home composting, and so yeah, I have a publisher that's kind of courting me to do a new book. And we'll see if I can get the time to write a book in between the other things I got going on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll put links to everything where people can find you in your show notes, and we'll be following your work and taking your advice. So thank you for what you're doing in the world, for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. You'll find those links at catalysttalks.com. Join us. We continue this conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out to me privately, you can send me a message at stephanietrager.com. Your attention here means the world to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.